And I'm curious what you saw in your own approach to your own content and to the Spirit Science Project. How did you see your approach begin to change as you kept working with psychedelics, like over the past, what has it been, 10 years, a little bit more?
You saying my approach to
Your
all
approach,
of the work, or to
your approach to what you wanted to put out and how you wanted to put it out?
You know, Master Elijah described this to me really well the other day. He's like, look, when you started this, you kind of were like a guy with your own little boat, with a light on the boat, and you were setting off into the unknown. You didn't know where you were going, but you were like, I'm just going to go and find out. Whatever the truth is, I wanted to know it, and I set off on my own. I had a light on that boat, and a lot of lost souls. You know, the light was like the videos that I was making, and a lot of these lost souls are people who were also seeking some other truth other than what the traditional mainstream world was telling them. They saw that light, and they were like, that looks like what I want, you know? So a lot of people came on board, and suddenly I'm the captain of a ship with millions of people, but I didn't really have a destination in mind at first. I was just seeking. And in seeking, a lot of people came to me and started seeking with me and following my videos. But then I think there was a challenge that happened where a lot of people started looking up to me as though I had all the answers. And in doing so, they put me on a pedestal. And then when so many people put me on millions of people are messaging me and talking to me about how wonderful and life-changing my videos have been and the content has been, it was a lot to deal with, and I went through my own ego trip for a while, being like, yeah,
I am the shit.
I am the shit. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm, you know, and and you know, it's only from having gone through this journey of 11 years and trying to make, like I just described with the story of the ego, like my ego being like, well, as if I'm, you know, I can't make mistakes, so I'm gonna do this and do that, work with this person and that person, and I created some things that were maybe not the best for me or for even for the audience, because I wasn't thinking that I have this responsibility of the spiritual path of all these people. I was just an explorer myself.
Right.
So people are coming on board, trusting me to be the captain of the ship, but I don't know where I'm going. And then some people jump ship, and now that's technically on me, even though I didn't really know that I set out to
guide them in the first place.
Exactly,
right.
exactly.
Sure.
So there's been this rapid development in the last few years of like this maturity of how much responsibility I didn't even know that I had to be the best captain that I could be. And in doing so, I'm like, okay, well, I need to know where I'm going. And so I started seeking actual masters and gurus and people who could teach me and guide me so that I could find my way quicker, because I didn't know that I really had the proper heading, you know? But I knew that I wanted to help make the world a better place. I wanted to help build communities and build healing centers and places for people to come and explore their spirituality and their practices, and to teach the material that would be the most impactful for someone, right? Because there's a lot of material. Some of it's useful and maybe some of it's not so much. And like, I think the biggest change in the last year especially has been really getting over the fear of the word God. Like, even though I've been making these cartoons called Spirit Science for 11 or 12 years, there was always that, like, well, you can call it spirit, just supreme oneness, divine intelligence, da-da-da-da-da. And I still say that sometimes. I said it on this call, or this, it's not call, you know.
Yeah.
I do too many Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Did it on this, said it on the podcast, because it's true. Like a lot of people have, you know, different ways of describing that mysterious essence that we don't even really have a word for. Or as the Tao says, the word that you can say is not the representation of the eternal thing, right?
Right.
And so I've come to really be like, just get over that fear of saying God, and then embracing that fully and giving everything to it.
So I have a hesitancy using the word God because there's such a religious connotation to it.
Yeah.
And it feels so co-opted by Christianity, Catholicism to me, because that my family's Italian Catholic, and that's the only context I've ever heard it in growing up, was by religious families. And so I've always had a hesitancy, even up to this day. This is the first moment where I'm talking to somebody who also has felt similar emotions toward that. So how now? And I think I just interrupted you. We're about to say this, but how did you start to understand your own fear of using that word? And like, what do you have any sense of where that fear came from? And then what?
No, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
It was the same thing. Because in the New Age world, people would rather associate with the nebulous, divine intelligence
as the universe,
as the universe, or the supreme power. The universe is telling me this, or and certainly, but then that actually kind of is insulting to the higher intelligence, because even by the standards of all the other world religions, the universe was created by that power, rather than is that power itself. Even in the New Age world, people love the Hermetic texts, the Hermetica and the whole of the Corpus Hermeticum, and even in that, it describes that the supreme power is its own living being, and it created the cosmos, which is in itself a complete and whole created being. And then we are the created being within the created being by the created being,
right.
And they're all mirrors of each other to some greater or lesser extent. And it's for us to walk within that holographic matrix of the created being to know the higher creator beyond it. And so, but it's the same as you. Like in the growing up, God was the word that all the Christians and the Catholic and all these traditions would use, especially the Christian one that I grew up in. And I think a lot of people who are in the New Age world they've grown up in a similar way that I did, and probably you did, where we kind of grew up Christian or Catholic or whatever, and then we moved away from it because the orthodoxy didn't really feel right. So then from the new perspective, or the New Age perspective, if you say God, it's like, ooh, I prefer spirit. I prefer a different language. But true unity, we're not going to get to unity if we're living with that's still a duality, a consciousness between those two things. If you're like, well, Christians believe what they believe, and I have my, well, that's still a separation. And then a lot of the ideas, though, especially within the New Age and whatnot, is unity between all things, and unity consciousness, and living as a unified species, right? Getting over the division. So in order to do that, then at least this was my understanding, was let's just look at all of the traditions together and use all of the names, right? But because with God is the most triggering, I've been using that more lately, because I'm like, no, I kind of want to stir the pot a little bit, because if I can say something that might help someone get over their concerns with that word, maybe they can come to integrate those original teachings too. Like this last year, I started reading the Bible for the first time, which I knew I would do one day, but it took some time for me to get there and kind of acknowledge it, because I was like, oh, I want to read the Bhagavad Gita, and I want to read the Upanishads, and I want to read the Tao, and I want to read
the Quran and everything else.
Exactly, go through all of these books, and I kind of was like, well, I'll get to the Bible later. But now that I've actually started reading it, I'm like, oh, I'm learning a lot from it, and being more comfortable in speaking about it and the different wisdom teachings that are in it, and making the appropriate connections to other traditions if it's called for. But again, it's like it depends on who you're talking to. For a person who is Christian, if you want to make an impact in their life, it's not necessarily your job or our job to like, oh well, yeah, Jesus is great, but have you seen how he might be similar to all these other, But you can just focus on Jesus. You can just focus on what they already know and provide a deeper level of understanding just through being the embodiment of the teachings, rather than having to turn everything into a teaching moment. Watch the full episode of the Good Trip podcast using the link in the description. Enjoy.